Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the LiftAffect podcast. I am your host, Matt McNeil, founder, clinical director, and director of human performance at LiftAffect, where we assist professional pilots with maintaining better mental health and optimizing their mental skills. The goal of this podcast is simple: to help pilots and other high liability professionals and disciplines come out of the shadows to discover how we can live better lives personally and professionally. Join us each episode as we discuss various topics ranging from mental health, mental skills and performance, to business, entrepreneurship, and a few other surprises along the way.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for another episode of the LiftAffect podcast. I'm your host, Karl Keller, and my trusty sidekick, main kick, who's stretching on the other side of the screen, Matt McNeil. Another week, buddy. Another podcast.
That's it, man. How often should we be moving?
You said every 1,000 seconds.
Every 1,000 seconds.
You know,
set your alarm on your phone or on your watch or something. Every 1,000 seconds, just move a little bit.
You know, I think you brought it up once before on one of the other podcasts, that one of the other things you use also to help, there's a couple of tools that you use. One is the watch. Yep. That, it vibrates to say, hey, get up and move. And the other one I think you brought up was something to help with the sleep. Now we're going to get on that subject today, but you were talking about the ring. That's something else, that it's another tool that people can wear that helps to give them feedback.
Devices. And the ring, but there's another one called the Apollo Neuro that I beta test for and use, which is a little device that it looks like you can put it on your wrist or your ankle. I put it on my ankle. My wife always says I look like I'm on an ankle monitor. She's like, "Did you commit a crime that I don't know about? Is that why you never leave?"
Oh, honey, it's really it's a test product. Yeah. Wink, wink.
Yeah, wink, wink.
Yeah.
Why are the cops outside? Don't worry about them.
They're monitoring.
Exactly. That's funny.
They don't want me to keep the product.
Yeah, but so the Apollo Neuro, we can talk about this another time, but it vibrates at a certain frequency to stimulate or upregulate or downregulate the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's like there's evidence-based, and it's pretty cool. I'm really interested in it.
We'll have to save that for another day, because that's the first I've heard of that one.
Get into that. Yeah,
but
there's some other ones too.
Before we start, I always got to ask my startup question. And how's your week going, buddy? How's it been?
My week has been fast. It's moved quick. How has it been? I've had a couple good nights of sleep over a rash of bad. Yeah, those are total wins. I had a rash of just really rough sleep. But I've had a couple good ones. Made some improvements on that, and my daughter's going to a bridging ceremony for her Girl Scouts. She's moving up to the Brownies, going from the Daisies to the Brownies. So we got to drive 2 hours way down near the Four Corners, which
past
I was
Castle
like,
Rock?
Way past that. It's 2 hours away. You hit Colorado Springs and then you kind of head southwest.
Towards Pueblo.
A little west of Pueblo, but it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. They walk across this bridge, but I was like, cool, we'll go do it, a little road trip. And they're like, yeah, you need to be down there at like 9. I was like, dude, it's like 2 hours away. It's a Saturday. I can't. What do you mean? So we got to get everybody up and out. But that's what I got going on. What's going on with you? What's happening?
Well, my son is still having his night terrors, which it's tough. And I mean, there's really not much you can do, and just go over and hug him and hold him, and he eventually settles down. But it definitely it kind of disrupts the sleep. But it is what it is, and
work through that.
Other than that, it's like you say, it's hard to believe it's Thursday. Yeah. I was just looking. We're almost halfway. We're pushing pretty much near the halfway point of the year. It's going by fast.
I know it is, man. End of school's coming. So anyway,
yes, next week for me. For my kids. But all right, not that people need to know or care about my kids' school schedule. I know that there's a lot of questions about that, so I just thought I'd share that with everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
But I know you got an interesting comment from one of our listeners, and I figured I'm going to let you talk about this
I'll
one.
run
This
with
one
this.
Kind of piques your your interest.
So I get a lot of questions where people are asking, like sort of the general, how do I improve? Or what are my values? How do I determine values? You talk about values all the time, and what are my values supposed to be? Where do I make improvements? And one of the things that I've mentioned, I think I've mentioned, but the way that I conceptualize our life is that we have these constellations, or think of them like spokes on a wheel. Or even a better analogy is gardens. I use the analogy of gardens. I think it's even written about on one of the websites. Make this garden. I think Matt and Associates is a garden comparison. But we have these areas of our life that, if you think about a garden, what do you put in a garden? Well, you grow fruits and vegetables, or maybe it's just infested with weeds and rodents, or maybe there's no garden there. It's just a concrete slab, right? But a garden is something that you can either cultivate or you can ignore, or it can be non-existent. But we have these spokes of the wheel, these constellations that can become dysfunctional in our life. And what happens is we tend to focus on just a few. We put most of our energy in a few and we ignore the others until something blows up, until it gets infested with weeds. And then we run over there and try to tend to it. But the problem is, what happens with weeds? If you've ever done any gardening, weeds jump the fence, right? So you want to get rid of the weeds because they can find their way. They can go under the fence. They can go over the fence. They start to infest all the other gardens next to it. So the constellations that I've found clinically that where people get into trouble, there's 9 constellations. And it's funny, I used to really think of it as 8. But there's one last one that I've added that's been really a response to COVID. I'll tell you what that is. But the constellations are career, your health, your physical health, your body health, your emotional health, your hobbies, your avocation, spirituality, and that doesn't necessarily mean religion. It just means something that feels powerful or significant or mysterious that's outside of yourself, but that impacts yourself. Intimate relationships, family and friends. And I combine those two because some people don't have family. Their friends really are their family. So family and friends, finances, and the last one is community. So those are the different areas of our life that are that impact us, whether we're aware of it or not. They are the constellations that can become dysfunctional. And every issue that people come to me with, whether it's for coaching or whether it's for therapy, falls into those different categories. And so when people say, I want to make an improvement, or what are my values? Well, the question is, well, in which part of your life? It's not like you're just this one thing and there's like, here's my value. It's like, well, like your values around finances might be very different than your values around spirituality, or your values around hobbies, or your and what happens I've found is that as with professional pilots, which is the bulk of what, was the only thing we do at LiftAffect, and the vast majority of what I work with are pilots. The gardens that we tend are usually finances, career, hobbies. That's the pilots. And that's great. But then when something blows up in one of the other gardens is when they come running and saying, "Oh my God, this is blown up." And then they got to run over and sort of tend to it and fix it. And one of the things I try to work to help pilots improve their life, and we most certainly do in the V1 project, is we're looking at all of those constellations and saying and it's not to say they're equal. You don't spend equal time in career as you do in spirituality. I mean, you're not, or you do in hobbies. I mean, that's not, you can't be distributed equally. So that's not the goal. But if you're not tending to all those gardens, what happens? They get infested with weeds and rodents, or there's just nothing there. There's no garden there. It's a concrete slab. And when there's nothing cultivated there, that creates discord in our life. So to become well-balanced and to kind of improve yourself overall, to make self-improvements, it's really the question of how do I make improvements in each of those areas? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, when you went down the list, there's not much that it doesn't. I can't think of anything that I would say isn't covered by one of them. Just it's a curiosity question to me from your perspective. Obviously, they all have importance, and they're all every one of them at different times is the most important. Because it's of a pressing need or a pain point. But do you feel like any one of them is the dominating one or dominates over the others, as far as because they're not all equally balanced? Do you feel any?
I think for professionals, pilots, but physicians or CEOs or attorneys, litigators. I mean, career has to be a very significant garden that you cultivate. At that professional level. I mean, we've made a lot of sacrifices. We've spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to even just to get to there, and then to be able to maintain that. And when you're flying, for example, I mean, career has to be a huge piece because you're gone for 4 days a week or 3 days a week. It's not like you clock in, you go for 6 to 8 hours, and you come home, which is still significant, but it's like. It's so involved because you may not be working, but you're still on the road and it's still career centric. You're still under the umbrella of the career and the sacrifices that we just have to make. Career is a garden that is really significant. I think the motivation for money, and I see this is where the wheels come off is, it's not that you don't have the money. I mean, if you're a regional pilot, spent time at the regionals, you know what it's like to not have any money. I mean, I was on food stamps, literally, for a period of my life when I was just, there was it was just atrocious. And the stress of not having the resources financially created discord. But flip it on the other side, the drive to make more money, can be a dysfunctional garden, which has impacts across all the other. Again, remember, it jumps the fence. So if something becomes discordant in one of those gardens, it's going to spread to all of the other gardens, and the the push to have more, make more, pick up an open time, find double time, and the airlines are kind of the worst perpetuators of this. Is that they don't make life improvements, but they just throw more money at the pilots, thinking, well, these guys, they just love the money. They'll go after the money. You just throw a little money at them and they'll spend all their time. They'll go rototill that thing all day if there's more money in it. And it's great that pilots are making more money, but what's the cost? At what cost to the other
gardens? One of those other constellations is suffering.
Exactly. And we see, we know lots of guys and gals that have said, I really screwed my life up because I just chased down the dough and I ignored my family, or I ignored my health. I ignored, my spirituality. I ignored the things that keep me going because I got to make more money. I got to go, fill the wheelbarrow full of dough.
Let me ask the question a different way. Because this one I do have a kind of a definite opinion on, and that is, which of those do you feel like gets the short end of the stick, that's tended to the least of all of them, that's not given enough of its due, that you got to tend to it to keep it quote unquote healthy?
Well, I mean, you're talking to the guy that runs a mental health clinic.
I was going to say, to me, that's the one, the psychological health.
It's the emotional, psychological health.
We just don't give ourselves. It's like we think we're fine, and it's, I would say it's more of a case of denial. I have no problems. I'm good to go there.
Yeah.
And so we don't really, and I can speak from personal experience on that. That's something that we all need to be more aware of and be more willing to acknowledge. And I think of all of them, that's the one that is also not, people have issues talking about it.
Yeah.
Why
do you think
everything
that
else
is?
More visible. Historically, aviation has been a male-dominated career, and it still is majority percentage-wise. I think men in general, and I could put this across most different career fields also, if you want to say that, have always been the provider. They always stoic. They always don't, you don't show any weakness. You just kind of, you tough it out. And I just feel like sometimes we and people in the aviation career are also really, really good at compartmentalizing. And you put those two pieces together, and you've got people that are willing and able to put that in its little box, put it in the drawer, close it up, and move on to other issues, either because that's what the situation requires or because it's just convenient. I don't need to deal with it. And I think it's one of those things where I'll give you an analogy that I've always said. I tell this to my kids: if there's an issue, deal with it. Because what is a little minor irritant today that you talk about and gets it over with, if you don't, all the little minor irritants build up, and one day you explode. And over what is a little minor irritant, people are going, "What the heck's wrong? Why are you so upset?" Because it's all those other things that's accumulated that you've just ignored. And I think we, as a group, do that, and then when it does happen, we struggle to deal with it because it's something we've.
So let me give you some perspective on this. There's something called,
again, just my opinion.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about kind of what the data, what the research shows. There's things called acculturation. Acculturation is, what is the culturescape? What are the rules and the norms of the culture that dictates? It's sort of nature versus nurture. This is how we're nurtured to evolve and to be able to cope. And men in our society are acculturated to express two emotions, just two. Good, I'm good. How you doing? Good. Or anger. And it's celebrated in our society. In fact, men are rewarded for those emotions. Anger, he's powerful, right? He's a very powerful male. And that's created there's actual condition that men suffer from called alexithymia, which is, here's a demonstration of it. I'll ask a guy, how do you feel, if it's not outside of fear or outside of anger or good? And you know what the most common answer is? I don't know. I don't know how I feel. Especially when something's happening for them. I just talked to a guy this morning. His wife's leaving him. That's it. She's done. And he's devastated and he's in tears and he doesn't know what to do. And I said, well, how do you feel? What's going on for you? How does all of this feel to you right now? Could express the anger, but when it was outside of the anger, it was, I don't know how I feel. It's called alexithymia. I've been guilty of that. I have to work at that myself. And part of that is because, one, as men, we don't even have the language around being able to express what we're feeling. There's no language development around it. It's just never been described to us. It's not been modeled to us. And in fact, this is what happens, right? As soon as you start to open that up, and this is exactly what this poor soul did this morning with me. As soon as you start to open up some of that, it immediately goes to, I don't want to be a pussy here. I shouldn't be. I'm sorry for being such a pussy. And that's what we've done to ourselves. And we'll get to the women, what's been done to women, but that's a whole nother thing. But as men, we have been acculturated to not express anything but
it's a sign
anger
of
and
weakness,
good,
not strength.
Yep.
We're always supposed to be the stoic, strong one.
That's right. And so we don't even have the language around it, and we don't have we can't describe it. And then when we do feel something that's outside of that, it's typically I don't really know what I'm feeling. And so a lot of what we have to do with men at LiftAffect is to kind of teach them and educate them around emotional well-being and how their brains work. That's why I take a very biological approach. It's like a systems approach. Okay, tell me how the airplane works. How does the airplane fly? Well, how does the mind work? How does the mind fly? So it's not, it's not woo-woo. It's not kind of voodoo. It's biological to kind of give you the foundation to start to be able to talk about what we feel. Women, if they express anger, that's not culturally acceptable, right? Angry woman is hysterical, histrionic. She's the B word. Because they're acculturated to not show that at all. You can't be strong, right? Might make you the B word. So it's cultural. In other cultures, it's very different. It's very different. But these are cultural norms, and this is kind of how we've arrived at this place. So I think part of the reason that men find themselves in these situations is a lot of it is acculturated. It's what is acceptable, what is not acceptable.
And obviously I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole for just a second with the psychological health. And you were talking about why is it it's something that up until recently hasn't really been talked about. People kind of avoided discussion. And I'm going to ask you a question. Again, I have an opinion on it. What do you think has driven the recent people being more willing to talk about it? Do you feel like there's an event or something that has occurred that has allowed it to be more, people can be more open in talking about it than previously? Like I said, I have an opinion on it, but I'm curious.
I think there's generational shift is certainly part of it. The younger generations, like the baby boomers, like grew up with, men don't talk about that stuff. Men go to work, don't complain, work yourself to death, die. There's no emotional nothing. And the greatest generation, they call it the greatest generation, whatever, talking about your emotions was like not a thing. That's just not.
And they didn't
talk about it, which, greatest generation, sure, but a lot of dysfunction, and they died early, and there's a lot of, and then the Gen Xers, my generation is kind of like sort of latchkey kid generation. We started to sort of talk about it, SSRIs came out when we were in college. And so it was like depression was a thing, and we, and everybody went and got on Prozac, and then there's the millennials where they all had therapists growing up. Their parents were in therapy. They did family therapy. They had school counselors that were present. And then the Z's, forget about it. They all have therapists. And it's so, I think a lot of the generational shift, mental health has become much more acknowledged and just sort of part of, mental health to young kids. It's like, it's as common as putting your shoes on. It's not like a big taboo, a taboo issue. So I think that's happened. I think COVID did something as well. It really put people into different kind of fear states. And it was disruptive and it was scary, and people alive hadn't ever gone through something like this. They'd never gone through a pandemic, a big flu, or not COVID wasn't the flu. Let's not do that. We're not having that conversation. But we had never had a biological contagion on a global level that we had dealt with, unlike previous generations had dealt with that stuff. It was our first, time dealing with it, and it threw people in a tailspin. And I think social media has done, there's some good things about social media and some really bad things, but the awareness piece around mental health and the impacts of poor mental health is it's so like accessible and it's talked about, and there's platforms around this. There's podcasts. I mean, this wasn't a thing 20 years ago, right? You can go get an education on Spotify and YouTube. I mean, you can go get a PhD worth of material for nothing. So the access has changed. That's kind of my thoughts on it. I mean, there's a lot more to that. But what's your opinion on it?
I knew you were waiting to ask. To me, the seminal event happened before COVID. And it happened over an extended period of time. And I believe it was the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict. And I'm going to say conflict. And it was over a period of years. And it didn't start in 2001, 2, and 3. I'm talking about from 2006, 7 till about 2014, 15. And we had something that had never really happened in peacetime, and that was a large-scale mobilization, if you want to say, or activation, I shouldn't say mobilization, of Guard and reservists. And we were having whole units coming from towns, going over and spending year and a half, coming home, being home for a year and a half, going back again. And these were young kids.
Yeah, multiple deployments.
Multiple deployments. And all of a sudden, you were seeing major mental health issues that were coming because what was, I can't say unique, but what was different about this conflict is a military force, with the exception of a small group inside of all the services that's trained to be a policeman, military police, security forces, whatever they are. The majority are there to learn how to fight, to soldier, to fly and fight. They're not there to be policemen. And most of them ended up being there in a police type environment where they weren't trained to do that. And so people would be coming up and for whatever reason, either because ideological or because of pressure, that, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to kill the rest of your family. People that you were working with or that you gave candy to children, the next day would blow themselves up to kill an infidel, really affected people in a very big way. And all of a sudden, this was becoming front page kind of issues for people. And I think that's what kind of brought it to the forefront, because it affected so many people in such a short period of time. And the younger generation was more willing to talk about it. So when it affected them, this wasn't hide in the shadows like the Vietnam War, where people came home and they were just the weird crazies that slept underneath the bridge. These were everyday American, youth that were struggling to cope with this in going back and forth. I think that was when it started. That's when people started acknowledging, hey, this is not something that's just, for people that are just not quite right in the head. There's events. PTSD is a real thing. Mental health, mental education for mental health awareness is a big deal. And I think that's when it started. COVID, I think, definitely highlighted it because now it affected everybody. You didn't have to be off in a conflict. But I think it started then where people were already starting to talk about it. And some industries, some career fields were more readily willing to address it.
So
the aviation community was slow.
Yeah. So we're talking in the aviation community, I agree.
And I'm just saying, but I think it also helps with the families to kind of understand things. There was a more acceptance when people started being willing to talk about it. It wasn't, you got that. It was waiting for people to talk about it versus the stigma. Once people started, they realized, it's not a stigma. Because other people had already realized that this is a thing. Yeah. Versus you finally talk about it and people go, I don't want to talk to you, or that you're weak. So I feel like it was a combination of those two things.
It's still pretty damn underground, though, isn't it?
It takes. This is not something that's fixed overnight, or people come out and talk about it. The resources, the help, the willingness to have the support is still something that's evolving. So yes, I think it is. People, because when you look at the pilot force, you've got a really young group that I think you've mentioned is more willing to talk about it, and you've got a large group that is reaching near the end of their career life that has spent an entire career of not really talking about it and addressing it. So I think for the next 5-10 years, you're going to still see these people that have really not, they've kind of kept it in the locked away for so long. And whatever reason, because you were saying there were two groups, the really young and the people getting ready to retire.
Yeah,
that's the
and
kind
there's
of groups
different
that you're dealing with.
subgroups. I mean, we're talking military. I mean, more military members have died by suicide than have died in the conflicts. And like there's. I mean, I can't remember how many it is. Like several a day. I think that's decreased a little bit, but like it begs the question: what the hell is going on? I mean, what are we doing here?
Didn't mean to drag you so deep down into that, but it was something that was just something that I've always felt like, there were triggers that, and this was a good thing that came out of a very bad time for people going over and seeing. But when you tie them all together, the constellations, and you put them all together, how do you see somebody having a healthy balance with those and making sure that they're tending to all of the different gardens?
This is
and
the
not
values
putting too much
work.
focus.
Yeah.
Too much focus in one garden at the expense of most or all the others.
Yeah, there's a difference between goals and values, and we live in a society that is so goal centric, right? Goal is I need this, I got to have it, I need to check this off. And there's nothing wrong with goals. We've talked about it in the past. Goals are fine, but if they don't support a little higher purpose, of what you care about, then they're kind of stupid goals. And you'll achieve, either you'll just give up on them because they're not really that important to you, or you'll achieve it and then you'll be like, what's the next? Give me the next thing. And I think being able to vet through those gardens and figure out, like, what do you actually care about in that garden? What's the meaning for you? What are your values? Not just goals, but what are your values in those gardens is a great place to start. And the only way you can do that is through value creation exercises. I mean, you gotta work on determining, what values are, and then how do you actually reflect on them. I mean, there's a difference when you're 18 of what your values are versus when you're 50. When you're 18, your values are basically what you've been told. I mean, that you haven't lived a lot, you haven't done a lot. Yes, there are exceptions to that, but I mean, you haven't done enough laps around the globe to really understand what you care about. But when you're 50 or 60 or 40, you've actually lived a little bit, and you can reflect meaningfully on what has been impactful for you, both positively and negatively. So I think when we're looking at the gardens, the first step is one is recognize, these are constellations of my life that matter, that are impactful. And I need to probably evaluate what is the condition of these things. What's going on in there? What's growing in there? Or what's not growing in there? Is it dead? Is there just nothing in there? Getting a 50,000 foot view first is a good place to start.
The word I would use is balance. If you're focused, and this is
your opinion. I'm going to vehemently disagree with you on it. But go ahead.
But what I was saying is, when I say balance, I mean if you're focused exclusively on finances, you're not balanced in that regard. You need to be realizing that there's other things out there, because you could have all the money in the world and be miserable and have no family, no friends, no community, be a hermit. And that, to me, like I said, that's why I use the word balance. You got to make sure that you got your fingers in all the pots.
Yeah.
So, but go ahead.
Balance. I think balance is complete bullshit. How are you balanced when you're gone 4 days a week? Like, you can't. Like, balance. I think we toss the word and we're held to this impossible standard of balance. And like you haven't been you couldn't have gotten to the place where you're at in your career if you were balanced. And so I think balance is this like perfectionistic kind of illusory nonsense. Like, you can't possibly be balanced. And look, I guess it depends on how do we define balance. Is it time? Well, you can't be balanced when you're gone 72 hours or 96 hours in a week and be like, okay, I want to be balanced at home. I mean, that's kind of preposterous. I think what it is you got to figure out what is most important. And when we're unbalanced, we tend to think either nothing is important or everything is important. And there's like a lack of a proper vetting sort system of determining what is important. I mean, that's why, most important secondary tasks, not everything can have the same level of weight. So being able to filter through what is important I think is a step toward achieving more what I would define as of balance. But I see people come in and they just shame themselves because they say, I'm just not balanced. I can't spend the amount of time with my kids, or I come home and I'm exhausted and I can't give the attention to my kids that I want to give them. Or I can't, I can't spend time over on, here because I'm over here. And look, you can't do everything. You can't be everything all the time. But where I see people really fall apart is they don't prioritize. They don't have a way of determining what is actually important and what is not. And then they end up spending all their time doing stupid shit, that's not really very important. So, I mean, that's my thoughts on balance. I'm not a huge fan of balance. I think it's really hard to be balanced when you're in a profession.
I guess my comment is not to be exclusively unbalanced, to realize that you need to be able to put a portion of your effort across all of those buckets. If you want to look at each one as an individual bucket, where you're not dumping it all into one at the exclusion of all the others, because I think it has long-term negative effects. That's my opinion.
Well, when you tend to when you're tending to a garden, it might take a little bit of work up front, but once you get everything like seeded and plotted, and then it's like a few minutes to water it every day. It's not a big deal. But if you wait for it to blow up, then you got all this work that you got to do, and that's where I think people become unbalanced. Is they don't have a system to regular maintenance. They just wait for it to become sick. It's kind of like how we do healthcare in our country. Healthcare. I mean, it's not called healthcare. It's called sick care. You don't go to the doctor till you're sick, which is just the stupidest, absurd way of optimizing lifespan and health span, is to wait till you're sick. And unfortunately,
you're not allowed to go get preventative health screenings and a lot.
You don't get preventive,
because they won't cover that, but they'll cover it after you're sick.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a for-profit system, which, I'm sure people disagree on that too. But every other place in the world doesn't do it this way, except we do. Come on. But it's I think the being able to spend a little bit of time figuring out what you care about in each of those areas and planting some seeds and cultivating that will allow you to spend a disproportionate amount of time where you need to and still be able to maintain those gardens, to keep the wheel spinning. But if you just ignore it or don't do anything, then it's going to blow up. And then you're going to have to spend a disproportionate amount of time over there dealing with that. So that's what I would perceive as
totally
balance.
Agree with that. Yeah. And I totally I buy that totally. Any last thoughts you want to throw on your constellations? Is there, because like you say, there's spokes.
Yep.
What is the hub? Is there a hub, or is it just that's where they all connect?
You're the hub. You will sit in the middle. That is the essence of you, how you feel, think, what you do with your time, what you do with your body, your actions, sit in the center of that. And just even writing this out, I mean, I've shared that wheel. I've got a diagram even with the wheels, and I know some of my clients have printed that out and they just keep it on their fridge. or they keep it on their phone and they just look at it. Just looking at it a little bit and be like, okay, where is this at today? What have I done? I haven't done much in this garden. Let me make a quick call. Let me just, read a passage. Let me write a little entry here. Let me just sprinkle a little bit of love onto that garden. And it's amazing what that does. But if it's not top of mind, it tends to just get swept under. And so I would just ask people that are listening to this to think about those gardens: career, health, hobbies, emotions, spirituality, intimate relationships, family and friends, finances, community. Just spend a moment to just vet through where am I at with these? What's happening in my life in those different areas? And if you just kind of recognize what's happening, it opens the door to saying, maybe I should cultivate this just a little bit. I think that's a simple ask. You can't take it all on at once, but just even, just the consideration of it puts you in the top 10%. Because most people don't even think about this. They're just spending all their time overly invested into a couple of things and ignoring these other areas. And that's fine until it's not fine. And when it's not fine, then you're going to get ripped away to try to do all this damage control that was no preventive maintenance at all. And that's a recipe for disaster.
And I think that sums up the one thing which encompasses all of it for today that I would have asked you. We've come to the end of our podcast today. Please, as always, smash the like button, leave a review, comments, send in your comments to us, podcast@liftaffect.com. We read them, we talk about them. We're here for you. Matt?
Have a good week.
Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the LiftAffect podcast. If you want to dive deeper into this episode and every episode, go to our website, liftaffect.com/podcast. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you'd follow us on Spotify and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate your support. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all with the ID Matthew McNeil. This show is brought to you by LiftAffect, a clinical mental health and consulting company that assists air carriers, corporate flight departments, pilot unions, and commercial pilots by providing comprehensive psychotherapy and mental skills coaching services to pilots with mental health and mental performance-related issues. Visit liftaffect.com, that's LiftAffect.com, to book your free consultation. And finally, this podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of counseling, psychotherapy, medicine, or any other healthcare service, including the giving of medical advice. No therapeutic or provider-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and any materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining advice for any psychological or medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the LiftAffect podcast.